Okay, so as far as APRA-AMCOS, who we are, we represent songwriters and publishers for the works that they create. We've got about 108,000 members. So essentially who we are is a body that represents them anytime their music is used, and we make sure that we collect the royalties for them. That means that we do have relationships with a lot of licensees, so people who use the music, and make sure that we try and represent them, our musicians, the best that we can. We have a number of blanket licenses where that makes sense, to represent a number of works across the community of songwriters that we have. But music licensing being the way that it is, we don't represent everything. So where we can, we will represent them in, cafes, restaurants and things like that, on record labels, releases, things like that. But there are individual agreements that happen between songwriters and licensees as well. A good example of that is synchronization for film, where writers prefer to deal directly on that stuff. So we do reach out to help them when we can, but there are differences in licenses that we offer. We essentially work from the Copyright Act, so that gives us the right to collect for our writers' works in certain areas. The copyright exists for a songwriter as soon as the work is created, and so they register that song with us to administer on their behalf in certain areas. But the copyright always stays with the songwriter in that instance. Copyright lasts for 70 years after a songwriter passes away. So it lasts for a fairly long time. And essentially until it's out of copyright, there is always a fee attached or a royalty attached to that work. We collect royalties wherever it's used in public, on a production, in film. There are so many ways it can be used, and we represent them in those cases where we can. We've got various initiatives as an organisation that we try and be a part of when it comes to songwriters, and make sure that they're getting maximised use for their works. So we've got Song Hubs is kind of a songwriter workshop for our members. We've got song competitions, conferences. We have representation at a whole bunch of awards and events places, and we do a lot of grants for our members as well, just in order to get them to create, so that there's more work available for us to license as well. Okay, down to the nitty-gritty, and this is a little bit complicated, so please, if you have any questions, stop me. But essentially, a recorded song has two forms of copyright. So the musical work is the composition or the songwriter's creation, and then the sound recording is the artist's creation. So there could be a number of different sound recordings attached to a musical work in that regard. And when you're clearing music, you need to get the clearance from both the songwriter or their representative, and the artist or their representative. And depending on how you use it, what kind of media is used, there may be various different other organisations that get involved. So it gets a bit tricky. But essentially, APRA-AMCOS, what we do is we represent the musical work part of that. So we represent songwriters and publishers where it's performed, reproduced, in some instances for sync, but very minimally. And then PPCA and ARIA look after the sound recording side for record labels and artists. So they're the two kind of separate areas, I guess, that we think about whenever a song is used in any kind of form. It's always best to check either with APRA-AMCOS or the PPCA or ARIA to make sure that all rights are covered there. Yeah, I think that's it for that one. So I tried to kind of break it down a little bit. Synchronization is always a bit of a tough one because synchronization is the start of when you're using music, particularly online. So in regards to this, let's just say we're looking at the rights of this photo, and that's the music in this instance, or there's a song that's going with this photo. So when you bring the photo and the music together, that's the synchronization. So you're bringing the two elements together. As soon as that happens, that's sync. Reproduction is when that's being copied. That particular music and video is being copied in order to push out via various mediums. So in this instance, we're looking at a photo, say we did a live story on Facebook and we're putting music to it. The reproduction is pushing it out to Facebook, and then the communication is when someone actually accesses that video online. So there are 3 different rights that happen in that one process. And depending on the platform or the songwriter and all that sort of stuff, it really could be that you're talking to the songwriter about the synchronization, and then the reproduction and communication is covered by us by a blanket with a platform. So it's always best to double check with us, I guess, at the very beginning to make sure that all your bases are covered when it comes to what platforms you're using and you know, whether we can help you out with connecting you with the songwriter or the publisher. Okay, this is another bit of a diagram I tried to do to make sure that, or just to lay it out in front of you to show you that there are various different ways that you could go depending on the status of the work. So if we're looking at the musical work owned by the composer in this instance, the first question you would ask if you're using one in film is the work in copyright? So has that 70 years past the date of death passed for the particular work? If it hasn't, then the work's still in copyright. If it's out of copyright, you don't actually have to clear that work. It's free for use. So in respect to the musical work only in this instance. So it's always best to check if it is in copyright or not. That's probably the first question you'd ask. If you've identified it is in copyright, you would work out, does the composer have a publisher representing them? Again, this can be discovered through us, but again, if they don't have a publisher, you can contact us and we can get you started with the process anyway. But if they do have a publisher, you know who the publisher is, it's probably best to get in contact directly with the publisher. On the sound recording side, it's a little bit different. And again, we're talking about using music in film or TV. So is the work in copyright? If it's not, you don't need to get a license or get clearance because it's out of copyright. Got to be careful there too, because if it's been remastered or something like that, it's 70 years from the date of the master as well for the recording. So just double check. If you're not sure, ARIA can help you out there. Is the work in copyright? Yes. Are you using the original artist's recording? So if you're using the artist's recording and the artist has a record label, you just contact the record label. If you're using the artist's recording and they don't have a record label, contact the artist management. So it's kind of the same scenario as, do they have a publisher, do they not? But on the other side. The only variance here is if the song is being performed as part of the scene, so the characters in the scene are performing that work, you're not using the artist's recording. So you don't need to get the license from the artist to use that recording. That's kind of the difference there, I guess. And just to differentiate between the sound recording and the musical work to make sure that you're getting both rights cleared there. Essentially, what we prefer that people do, if they're not sure particularly, is to call us first or email us first. We can set you in the right direction. Even if we can't help you with the license, we can certainly tell you who owns it, what their contact details are, and how to get through to them. So it's always good to contact us first if you're not sure. Once you get the contact information, you will you could possibly be required to provide an agreement between yourself and the songwriter or yourself and the artist, particularly if they're not represented by a label or a publisher. Arts Law have some really good template agreements that you can, I think, get for maybe $80 a template or something like that. It's pretty cheap, much cheaper than getting a lawyer. But, you know, they've got certain templates for film and TV and stuff like that you might be able to access. And then you would make an agreement with the composer or artist. Once you've decided on a rate, you always sign an agreement. It's just so much better for you both to sign that agreement and be really particular about what it covers. Just so that, you know, if you have a difference of opinion later down the track, then you can always come back to that that written agreement that you've got, and that's legally binding. So there's a few different ways to find music. I mean, often it's the case, and people will come to us at this point where they've got an awesome idea, they've got the track and everything sorted, but the track is just massively out of budget for them. So it's always good to have a handful of backups. But, you know, if you have the budget, music supervisors do this for you. You don't have to deal with it. They contact all the rights holders and clear it for a fee. An alternative is to find local artists that are happy to work with you on that kind of stuff, because generally they're going to be less expensive and probably more likely to want to be involved. Or there's production music, which is a much cheaper alternative, but, you know, that's essentially library music, so it's not commercial in any way. When it comes to global licensing, there are a few things, few rights to be cleared, and it's just kind of, in our experience, different rights tend to sit with different people depending on who you are. So with the producer, generally the sync is the responsibility of the producer, where they'll get in contact and deal with the synchronization. Generally, traditionally, distribution companies dealt with mechanicals on the DVD. More recently, you know, you're talking Netflixes and things like that, and they deal with the communication rights. So generally speaking, as long as you've got the sync cleared, everything else is covered once you get to that point. And then broadcasting and cinema rights are generally done in each society. So we have affiliate societies around the world that we deal with. And generally when money is collected from those societies, it'll come feedback to our composers locally. I changed this. I had a different one for the last presentation, but I changed it because we've actually got Peter Fenton is part of my team, and he was a producer on this indie flick, so I thought I'd include this one. But it's just a bit of a case study of using a piece of music in a film and how he went about it. In this instance, the producers decided that they wanted to use a Courtney Barnett track. The producers were friends, or one of the producers was a friend of Courtney's, so it was kind of an agreement that they had, verbal agreement between the two, but then eventually the contract side of things comes into play. So they contacted the manager, who directed them to the publishers, and the publishers and artists, the label sorted out the actual agreement between the two. So often we find we get involved a little bit late in the piece, and there's been a verbal agreement that one party thought meant they would get royalties, the other party thought they were getting it for free. So this is another example, I suppose, of making sure that you get all your details and you find everything in print and signed off on, because then there's no confusion. All the parties are across exactly what's involved, how much to pay. They make sure that there's no stings at a later stage, so that, you know, they know which territories or which countries they're looking to go and enter into, and so they know who to approach in those countries to make sure that all the rights are cleared. But yeah, again, it's one of those cases as well where sometimes a publisher won't represent the song in all countries. So it's good to kind of have all of the information up front and go, okay, where are we sending this film? Is it going to be worldwide? If that's the case, is it going to be streamed? Because that's another thing, there's a whole bunch of different territories you need to clear those rights in as well. So it's always good to know up front exactly where you want to send it. And again, if you're ever not sure, feel free to give us a call, and we can send you on the right path, at least send you to the right society in that territory if you're looking to go into a certain territory, or if it's worldwide, we can try and identify all the publishers and record labels that are involved across the world that you would need to deal with in order to clear it. I think that's about it as far as the presentation goes. I'm sure there's questions, so I'm happy to field any of them if you have them.
Hi. Thank you for all the information. That was very helpful. I've just produced a feature, and we have a few tracks that we've put in as key songs for now. Obviously, we don't have all the budget to secure some of these songs, but we were wondering what it might be the implications for getting local artists to do covers of popular songs, and what entail the rights around that.
It would still, the same rights would apply. It would just mean that you're possibly not paying, depending on who you're getting to do the covers, you're possibly not paying as much for the recording side. Mm-hmm. So to put it in an example, say it was a Billie Eilish track, and you wanted to clear it, and you got someone like the Jungle Giants to do a re-record. That's a weird mix, but let's just use them. It would definitely cost a lot less than having paying Billie Eilish for her recording of that work, but you'd still be paying her for the musical work side of things.
Yeah, okay.
But it would reduce it on the recording side.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you.
Similar sort of question, I think. I source music that's like it's karaoke practice music, right?
Yeah.
Like karaoke tragic. But it's essentially very close to original tracks, probably not performed by the original artist, but it's, like session bands who've recorded that song without any words, and then if you put words to it, then you've got a song, and you pay a fee to the provider of that karaoke tune, and they've got certain licensing things in their deep print, and I must admit I haven't read them that much. I've been able to post those with vocals on them on SoundCloud, and sometimes they kick it back and go, no, that's contrary to copyright. I was just wondering if it's similar, I think, to that question about having a local person do a cover. So essentially it's a cover. Would you think it would end up the same thing if I wanted to use some of those covers for a short film or something like that? Would I need to go through this process?
You would, certainly, for the musical work side of it, because you're using the composition as it stands.
Yep.
As far as using a karaoke version, that's essentially its own recording. I would check when you purchased it what the terms were of that purchase, because it may be that you need to seek clearance from the owner of that recording, even though it's not the artist.
Yeah, and sometimes they just automatically just push you back when you've added a vocal to it that you've recorded, which sort of defeats the purpose. If you're going to get it, you're getting it to practice it, so you want to record it. But it's particularly posting on things like SoundCloud and things like that. I've never tried to monetize any of it. It's just more a hobby. But if it was to do a short film, I may be tempted to use some of that music. So it's probably best to go back to the provider of that music.
Yeah, I think it's always best, because I know that we've had instances on Vivo and some platforms as well where because the platforms are in the US, there's a whole bunch of different complications as to why they take things down. But it's always best for you to have a contract that says that you are legally okay to use that work in that setting, because then you can provide that to a platform like that if they ever do take it down. Often when they take it down, it's a bot has trawled through and identified the work.
Oh yeah, it's immediate pretty much, you know, like there's certain artists that they just get, you're not doing Johnny Cash, or you're not doing, you know, so and so. They just sorry, we just took that off. But most of them go through. Challenged.
I'd always, just encourage you to check the terms and conditions of the karaoke version. And as long as you've got something in place for the musical work, I think you should be okay.
Great. Thanks for that. That's been useful.
No worries.
There's a question from Jay, who wants to know, are there any different rules for using music in the opening, closing credits of the production, I guess, opposed to just within the project?
The only difference really will be the price, because, I mean, you'll still have to get clearance for them, but the weight of being opening or closing credits is much heavier than having it throughout the film or incidental music. Does that answer your question?
How much would you say would be the difference, or what's the percentage you can really
That's impossible to answer. It really depends. Every single thing is determined by the media, the territory that's used, the scope of the film, the characters in the film, like the actors in the film, whether it's going to be a feature film or an indie film. Like, there's so many different variances that it's hard to say. And it, you know, it's also dependent on the work that you're using. If you're, again, using a Billie Eilish track compared to something that's just gone on Triple J Unearthed, there's a very big difference in the cost.
Thank you.
Hi, Claire here. I was just wondering if I can ask a question about no budget productions. I guess might be more of an ethical question, but if an emergent artist agrees to like a zero fee or a drastically reduced fee for worldwide rights, would there be a figure that would be a fair low budget fee to give them?
Look, generally, I think money is better than nothing. And if you don't have a budget, it might even be that you say, if the film is successful, there's a royalty that will give to you every certain amount of people that view it, or it's got to be something that you have control over. But I would always suggest at least a minimum flat fee straight up that you both agree upon. Again, that could be anything depending on the size of what you're doing. If it's a small indie, I would usually recommend, if I was advising a composer, that they look at, $500 is probably a minimum, because, that's their creation as well. So they need to value it in some way. But again, it really depends on a whole bunch of things. But you can get creative with the way that you set up a deal to pay a composer as well, so that, if it does end up being a success, they haven't just signed their music away for nothing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course. Thanks for that.
No worries.
It's a question from Holly. She says, thank you for your time, Janet. She says, are there any rights required when an actor performs a song as their character, but they've composed and performed it themselves, or is it just part of their acting agreement?
It depends on the terms of the acting agreement. There are some instances, I know I've come across it for TV more than anything else, where anything created as part of the program is then owned by the production company. So if there is a clause in that agreement with the actor that that's the case, then you probably don't need to pay. If it's an existing work of theirs that they're singing, they may already have registered it and it's already in copyright, in which case I would check to see if you didn't have an agreement with that actor that said anything of theirs in that film is no fee, then you might have to agree upon a rate like a normal work. But, you know, if they're singing it in a scene, then it's only the musical work that you need to look after then, because you own the rights to the recording being part of the program or the film.
Thank you.
I also had another question. I've also heard, and I don't know if it's a rumor or not, but say you had a film that you were looking to just put into film festivals for now, and is there a different fee for getting a song for films going to film festivals before, say, example, they were to maybe go to a streamer?
Yeah, so when we do licenses, I said there's a small instance where we would represent a composer if they elect for us to represent them. And in that case, I would suggest putting options in the agreement. So you're saying, yes, I'm happy for you to clear it for film festivals and for world or territories in perpetuity. But there's different fees attached to each different one. So with the film festivals, you'd have a smaller rate, obviously, than you would have if it ends up going and succeeding and going to other areas. And with options in an agreement like that, then you only pay for what option you require, the option that you require at that time. So that's probably the way to go about that.
Cool.
That way you've already cleared everything up front, but you only pay for what you use, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Are those, and were they the sort of contracts you can find on Arts Law?
I think so. Have a look. I'm happy for you to contact me to talk about how you would work an option into an agreement afterwards.
Yeah.
I don't have a legal background, but I can show you like what we would do in a synchronization agreement, for example.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And is there a different fee, for example, if you had 30 seconds versus the whole song?
Generally, yeah.
Yeah.
Most publishers and artists will work off a per 30-second rate.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Good to know. Cool, thank you.
I have a question. Thank you so much for tonight. That's a statement, actually. It's been very helpful. Just in regards to documentaries, we're in the process of filming one now, and I know that there could be a point where one of the participants might just reminisce about something that they used to sing to their child and might sing it, and it's a Disney tune of all things. Even if it's just part of a doco, like truth telling and everything, would we still, if we wanted to use that as part of the edit, would we have to seek rights?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
In that instance, if the person on screen is singing it, it's only the musical work, but yeah, you would. And there's a big myth at the moment that we keep busting, that there's a certain amount of work that you can use without having to clear anything, and that's not true. If anything's identifiable as a work, like as that work, then it's subject to copyright. Yeah.
Excellent. Great. Well, that'll be pricey, so we'll cut that. Thank you.
No worries. So I think you covered this in the presentation, but I was wondering if you're filming maybe say documentary and you're at maybe a film festival or even just in the shops, and there's a song playing in the background that's not the focus of the scene, what happens in that situation? Do you need to clear it or? Yeah, again, if it's identifiable as that song, then you'll need to clear it. It wouldn't be featured use if it's it depends who you talk to again with the featured and background. Generally speaking, we kind of say that if it's front and center, the actors are interacting with that music, then it's featured. But if it's incidental or background music that's by the by, it's happening in the scene, but the actor isn't really engaging with that music, then it's background.
but yeah, you would, background comes at a lesser rate, but there's still a rate attached to it.
Thank you.
In the future, will people have to pay for like TikTok, the music they use on TikTok? And
no, the way it has worked with TikTok is that they've done, a lot of publishers and labels have done global deals from the US to cover them for the world. So no one will, it'll never, I should never say never, but those kind of platforms, all of the representatives in the societies are doing their best to license them so that it's not anyone's goal to have the user pay for that stuff that they're accessing, no.
because it's a good marketing ad, isn't it? If you get you overused on TikTok, that means it's a good song.
Yes, generally. I mean, if you're marketing something on TikTok, though, then you will have to pay for it. It's like advertising. Yeah. So if you're a brand using a piece of music on TikTok, you would have to pay just like any other channel. But the people viewing it wouldn't have to pay. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
There's a question here about does APRA cover worldwide music or just Australian artists? Now, I'm not sure if that is in relation to the music or the artist, but maybe you can answer in both cases.
Yeah, that's a good question. We have relationships with a whole bunch of different societies around the world. So anytime their music is used here, we will collect and distribute back to them. And similar in the reverse. So if, our music is used in the UK, PRS, the UK society, will collect and then distribute back to us. So we're interconnected throughout the world in that regard. So while we represent Australian and New Zealand songwriters, we do have that kind of map with a whole bunch of different societies. So any time any music is used here, we would collect for it and send it back to the territory of wherever that songwriter resides. But generally speaking, for synchronization purposes, you would go back. Well, it essentially comes down to where the production is being made. So if you're making the production in Australia, you would seek your sync clearance here. And if you're distributing to the world, that clearance begins here. So you would seek it with the local publisher or record label for the world.
But it's only Australian artists that register with you, because every country's got their own version of APRA that they register with, right?
Yeah, that's correct. But then if they register, say, with PRS who are in the UK, our affiliation with PRS means that we would collect on their behalf if anything happened here for that particular writer and send it back. Yeah.
Okay. And what happens in a case where you hire, like a production hires a musician or a band to perform a song for the film, either for the film or for the soundtrack? Who owns the rights to that in that case?
Okay, again, it comes down to the contract. So if you are purely hiring the musicians as session musicians and you're commissioning their work, that essentially means you're paying them a fee, and anything they create for you is now owned by you. Essentially, all you do is you pay them that fee. In the agreement, you specify that they're responsible for sourcing all the other musicians and all that sort of stuff. And then you essentially either own or part own the works that are created as part of that project. So that happens a lot. They would still be entitled to their performance royalties, but you wouldn't need to seek clearance for it if you then owned that work after that, because it's yours.
And does that mean if other people use it in their films or their projects that you'll get that production will get the royalties of that music?
Yeah, so generally speaking, when you do a commission arrangement like that, you're best to set up as a publisher or a writer with us, and then we would represent you when it's used elsewhere.
Thank you.
Can I just ask, following on from that,
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, so if I've written, half a song in a script and then had it recorded at Backlog Studios, so they've written the music to the song, and then the actor has come in and helped finish it off, who owns the song?
That comes down to copyright. So it really has to be between yourself, every person that was party to creating that song. You would need to come up with splits. So when people register works with us, we ask them for their split. So who owns what percentage of that song? Often with bands, if there's a collaboration, they'll go equal parts. So there's 4 members of the band, 25% each of the song. But that's for everyone to work out at the very beginning, and also have an agreement in place for that, because that can get tricky as well when, there's an altercation with someone, or someone leaves the band, or whatever happens, someone decided that they wrote the whole work 5 years down the track. It's always best to have something in writing to say these are the splits. And then you would become a part of a society like us, so that we could represent that work for you wherever it's used.
So so I would also be a member for you.
Yeah, you would be the creator of that work, or a co-creator of that work, so you would have a share in that work.
Mm-hmm.
But
okay.
Of course, if it's your film, you don't have to get your own permission to use it. You would probably get the other co-rights permission, because it's important to have that in writing. But yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I have a question from Amy. It says, could you expand a little on the communication broadcast license in regards to royalty collection? For example, would Netflix or broadcasters like ABC or 10 have a communication broadcast license with APRA-AMCOS? And that is how the royalties are collected.
Yeah, that's a good question as well. So we have communication licenses with Netflix, and with ABC and the networks, we have communication and broadcast licenses. So anytime works are used on TV and they're made by those networks, it's covered by the agreement that we have. The Netflix ones don't include sync, but we cover the communication. So there's an assumption that the synchronization has been cleared directly between the publisher and the creator of that program. But then we cover the communication going forward. So it's not often communication is dealt with the society. It's not the kind of the producer that needs to go and make sure that communication is covered. Certainly here. In America, it's a bit of a different story, and it depends on exactly what you're doing. So it's always good to check. But yeah, generally speaking, societies will come in when it comes to communication and broadcast, because that's where, like I said at the start, it makes more sense for a blanket license with that end user, because there's so much involved. There's so many works involved on a mass scale. It just makes more sense to have a blanket license in place.
Thank you. I have another question. Can a record label or any of these individuals not want to give you approval because of the content of the scene that this music will be used in?
Yeah, absolutely. So depending again on the artist, often this happens on the artist level more so than the musical work, but it can happen both ways, where say there might be an artist who has a problem or has had a problem with alcohol in the past, so is particularly sensitive with anything that relates to alcohol in scenes with their associated with their music, similar to religion and things like that. So if it is a sensitive scene, they'll always ask you anyway for the description, scene description, what the program's about or the film's about, so that they get a feel for it. Also, generally if it's a scene making fun of that song, that might impact it a little bit. So that, yeah, it's sensitive to all of that when you come to that. But they're all the questions that will be asked of you by the owners of the work generally before clearing it.
Okay, great. Another question. In terms of cost, would a popular song from 50 years ago be as costly as a popular song today, or is that dependent on the label and the publisher?
Totally dependent, but generally speaking, you would think that something that's really popular right now would be more expensive, unless you're talking about, you know, the Beatles or something like that, which is generally always going to be expensive, and you know, you're never going to avoid that. So yeah, again, it really depends on the film, the reach, and the artist that you're using as when that comes to play. But yeah, there are instances where something really old has been a lot more expensive just because of who you're dealing with.
Great. Well, wait, I have another question. I know this would be hard to answer, says Rachel, but could you please give an approximate cost, maybe pick an artist, if their song was used in a TV for 30 seconds as a featured bit?
Yeah, it's impossible. Just to give an example, I guess, the way we've dealt with this in the past, or the things that we've come across, sometimes it could be because an artist or their management has this clear calendar of things that they're on, so they would put out a ridiculous cost because they're not interested in sync at this time, or you know, like I said before, the scene is a little bit contentious for them, so they're not really that interested in being part of it, so they'll put a ridiculous amount in there. Or it just might be that they're just, yeah, for any sync that's coming along, they're going to put out this price because they're not that interested. So there could be a variance of different things that come into play as to how they come up with the rate, or whether they agree or don't agree. It's just always good, I guess, in that instance, as filmmakers, to have something as a backup. So it's something that, you know, you can easily slot in there. Always do this stuff at the very beginning so that you have time and you're able to edit it out if you have to. Because, you know, if it does go past that point and you've gone too far with it and they've said no, or they've priced you out of the water and you want to use it anyway, infringement is much more costly. They can take you to court for going ahead with that without their permission. So it's always best to do this at the very beginning. So if they're being a little bit too much, or there's just, you can't agree on the terms, then you've got options, is my advice.
Okay, great. Question from Alyssa. Do you have to offer the artist an amount, or is there a price somewhere that you can see, or do they just give you a quote?
It depends who you're dealing with. So if you're dealing with a label or a publisher, they will probably give you a quote. I would probably suggest that if you've got an idea roughly of how much you can afford, that you go with that to them in the first instance, because then I guess with any negotiation, if like whoever starts off, it's more in their zone of what they want, right? So if you let them quote a price, it'll probably be a lot higher than you're willing to pay, or something like that. So if you went in and said, look, this is my budget, can't really afford much more than this, really like to use the work, what can you come up with? You're more likely to get something that's in the ballpark of what you're able to do, or they'll tell you that's just not possible. But I think generally speaking, when people come to us with their budget, we'll try and work within the range of their budget. And if not, we can at least tell them straight up, that's probably not going to happen. But with that kind of budget, you could be looking at something like this, you know? So I think having that in mind before you even start is always a good thing, because then at least you can work out what's going to be too high, and you don't waste your time negotiating when it's just not even possible for you.
I have an interesting question from Amy P. If characters in a scene are talking about a song and perhaps discussing the lyrics of it, but they're not singing it, does this require clearance as the lyrics, while spoken would be identifiable?
That's a good question. I don't think so. But, you know, it can be very grey there, where you could almost be singing it and it could be, it comes down to what the creator decides And then if it's if you don't agree on it, the two parties, then it goes to court, then it goes down to a musical expert deciding whether or not it's enough of the music to be classed as the song. So if in doubt, always check. But yeah, if you're just referring to something and you're not actually performing that work, then generally speaking, I would say that's okay. But again, if you're doing like a spoken word of a whole bunch of lyrics, then that's probably a problem, and you'd need to have a chat with them too about that. Again, it comes down to the creator and whether they agree or disagree.
A lot of interesting questions. This one from Amy Brown. I would like to use the Ninja Simone Feeling Good for a little artistic clip I'm putting together. Is that just way too big of a fish to fry, or should I, for example, have a local singer sing it, or just can it?
Oh, look, try. You never know. That's the thing. But always keep your options open. So maybe see if there's someone that will record a version if it ends up being too expensive for you. I don't want to say that all commercial tracks are really expensive. A lot of publishers and labels are really good to work with when it comes to saying, look, really want this track. Can you find me something similar? They might have something in their repertoire that's very similar that they can offer you for the budget that you want. So it's always good to reach out and talk to them about that stuff. So yeah, always give it a go. I'd never want to dissuade anyone from trying. But yeah, just always have a backup. Or have a chat to the people that you're reaching out to and see if they've got any alternatives that are similar. Often they do.
Great. So Ursula wants to know, I want my character to sing to himself a Rolling Stones song. It's a gas, 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 as he slaps aftershave on his face. This work will be published on TV. I'm not sure where to begin with the rights. Any advice?
If the character is performing it, it would just be a musical work. So you would go to the publisher of the Rolling Stones work as a first port of call. The broadcast and communication are likely covered. It's really just the sync that you're trying to clear. So yeah, publisher of the work, and you can do that either there's a work search on our website, which can sometimes be a bit temperamental, but give it a go, where you can type in the title and the artist, and generally it will return the publisher that is involved, or publishers, and that should give you a start as to where to contact. Otherwise, media licensing at apra.com.au is our email address, and we would steer you in the right direction, or at least give you the contact details.
So you're saying if someone can't find the copyright owner or the publisher or any bits of the puzzle, then they can just contact you for help?
Yeah.
Okay. Who are the international collective societies?
Oh, there's a lot. The main ones that we have, PRS, MCPS in the UK, Cash in Asia. There's a lot. There's too many to mention, but often there's one in each country, essentially. So we have agreements with just about all of them in some capacity. If you've got a specific one you're inquiring about, please get in touch and we can let you know contacts for them too if you need to reach out to them. But yeah, there's just so many.
Okay, great. So Tash wants to know, and she acknowledges that we've probably already covered this. What if you find a cover of a popular song with a small artist? How do you go about licensing that?
So that's, again, where the musical work and the sound recording being separate comes into play. The musical work will still be the original song. So it'll be the publisher that represents the original song, but then the sound recording would be cleared by the cover artist rather than the original artist. Okay,
great. So Steph has a question. So if you're working on a project and you don't know exactly where it will end up yet, will it just be a web series? Will it, go bigger or smaller? Obviously, when you apply to use the song, you need to specify that information. What if you're really not sure at that time where it will end up?
It's always good to reach out and just find out if there's, firstly, if you can reach the composer or publisher. Sometimes they're unreachable. So, getting in touch in the first instance is always a good idea, similar to the artist. And then, you won't get a quote for anything until you have an idea of the media, though. So, you won't have an agreement in your hands until you have all that information, but at least you know that you've got a direct line with those people, so that when that time comes, you can reach out directly to them. It'll save you a bit of time. But yeah, you won't be able to make an agreement or anything like that, or agree on money or anything like that, until you know exactly where you're trying to reach. And if you're not sure until the very last minute, but you know that you're going to get film festivals around the world, then that's a good agreement to have in the first instance. And then maybe, as I said before, have options for if it goes to a streaming service or if it goes to cinema, have those options in there so you don't have to keep going back and forth.
Right. Yeah. So having in the contract, if this happens, then this. If it goes to this level, then we'll do this.
Yeah. And there's fees attached to each of those. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good. Amy P wants to know, if an artist has publishing agreements with different companies in different territories, like Australia, UK, USA, do you need to seek individual sync agreements from these publishers in each territory, assuming your work is being broadcast in all three those territories, or could they use the Australia publisher license for the world?
The Australian publisher can only license for the world if that publisher, let me say this correctly. So if it was, say, Sony Publishing in Australia and then Sony Publishing US for the rest of the world, Sony Australia would be able to do that because it's only Sony around the world, right? It's just different territories that the Sony represents. If it's Sony in Australia and, say, Universal Publishing in the US, Sony can't license for the US because they don't have any international reach across the US. That they can only do the deal for their territory. So it's always best to find out first. There's often times where acts will be represented by Sony Australia for the world as well, where there's only the one company that you have to deal with. If Sony Australia had it for Australia, but Sony US had it for the rest of the world, Sony Australia can still probably do the license for the world. But if Sony Australia had it only for Australia and New Zealand and then Universal had it in the US, you'd have to approach both Sony and Universal to clear it, if that makes sense. Because they're two different companies. Often it'll be really big artists that you deal with that sometimes have, one company represents them for Australian territories, one for Europe and one for the US. So you might have to go to those three different companies to clear. It's unusual that there would be a different publisher in each country, like all around the world.
It sounds very complicated. So would you say it is better to just record your own music or to license existing music?
I mean, yeah, it's possible, and it's there's only really a small lot of artists that could have a whole bunch of different deals around the world, and that's when it becomes a bit complicated. But again, if you're ever unsure, just contact us and we'll try and get to the bottom of who you need to contact.
And what is the contact detail of the contact person or division at APRA-AMCOS that they need to contact?
It's media licensing. So it's my team. We deal with a lot of different queries and things like that. So media licensing, one word. And I think it's on, hang on, I'll put it up here. Where are we? There. So that's that media licensing email contact if you ever want to get in contact. Alternatively, our APRA-AMCOS website, we've got live chat on there that usually ends up with one of our agents, or the website's also a good tool for information if you just after general info there as well.
I'll give one last chance for questions because I know every time I ask, then a few comes through. So I can give one last chance and then doesn't seem like it. So, okay, fabulous. Thank you, guys. Thanks for joining. Janet, this was fantastic, and it's so good to know that you guys are there for us with our random questions, because I think it's, from the sounds of it, every song is different for every project. So I think, better to just go and check with you guys, ask all our questions there, and thanks for being there for our industry.
No problem, anytime. And no question too crazy. So hit us up with anything, and we'll do our best to help you out.
Fabulous. And thank you guys. Thanks all for joining. Keep an eye out on our Facebook page. We have a stunt event coming up in 2 weeks, and then a writers event in September as well. So please check it out, get your tickets, and we will see you guys there. And remember to get your memberships. Thanks, guys. Thank you, Janet.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.